Welcome! Tonight you'll hear a story they tried to bury behind velvet curtains and royal titles. A story not of crowns or conquests, but of a queen, humiliated, watched, and forced to prove her own motherhood in front of strangers. Get comfortable, because what you're about to hear really happened. England, 1688. A queen lies in labor, gripping the edge of her sheets, her breath short, her face pale. But she's not alone. 40 people are standing in the room. Not family, not friends, witnesses. They think she's lying, that she's faking the birth, that the baby inside her isn't real. Or worse, not even hers. So they watch her, closely, cruelly, waiting for a sign that she's deceiving them. She's in pain, but not just from labor. She's being judged. This isn't just childbirth. It's a trial. This is the story of the queen who gave birth under watch to silence her enemies. The winter of 1687 clung to the walls of Whitehall Palace like a secret. Outside, the streets of London trembled with frost and factional hatred. Inside, the royal halls were warm with firelight, but colder in spirit. Behind every curtain, behind every prayer, behind every glance from servant to noble, there was one quiet question that no one dared ask aloud. Was the queen really pregnant? Queen Mary of Modena had been married to King James II for over a decade, and for most of that time, her womb had known sorrow. She had suffered miscarriage after miscarriage, each one a private funeral behind closed doors, each one another blow to the fragile Catholic dynasty that ruled a fiercely Protestant nation. When the news came that she was expecting once again, the country did not celebrate. It panicked. There were whispers in the taverns, in the churches, in Parliament itself. Rumors crept through London like smoke from a fire no one could find. She's too old. She's faking it. They'll sneak in a baby and pretend it's royal. Some said the baby would be brought in hidden beneath a nurse's gown. Others believed it would arrive tucked into a warming pan, a metal tray used to heat beds on cold nights, now twisted into a symbol of conspiracy. Mary, already quiet by nature, became even more withdrawn. Her enemies mistook it for guilt. But it wasn't guilt that silenced her, it was grief and fear. She had already lost too many children, and now she was at risk of losing this one before it even had a name. At court, even the most loyal looked uneasy. Ministers exchanged glances behind her back. Bishops hesitated before speaking her name. And commoners, emboldened by their suspicion, whispered that the queen was not just barren, but treasonous. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying the entire future of the monarchy. And no one believed her. By the spring of 1688, Queen Mary's body was no longer hers. It belonged to the nation. Every movement she made, every flutter of her gown, every bite of food she consumed was scrutinized, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Her swollen belly, once a symbol of divine blessing, had become evidence in a public trial for which she had never agreed to stand. The court buzzed with paranoia. Ministers debated in hushed tones whether the child truly stirred within her. Women of nobility who had once kissed her hand now questioned her fertility behind folded fans. Even the king's own advisors, men who had sworn loyalty to the crown, began to doubt. Because if Mary of Modena truly bore a living son, it would mean a Catholic heir to the throne. And for Protestant England, that was unthinkable. Her enemies didn't need proof of deception. They only needed the illusion of it. And so they built a case, not in a courtroom, but in gossip, in pamphlets, in lamplit corridors. 1,000 lies sharpened into one damning story. She is barren. The child is false. This is not a royal birth. It is a plot. They said her pregnancy was too sudden. They said her belly didn't grow the way it should. They said she stayed out of sight. because she was hiding the truth. But Mary had simply grown tired. Tired of being pregnant with hope and burying it in silence. Tired of bleeding in private while the world called her cold. Tired of praying for mercy while being accused of sin. King James, aging, stubborn, and increasingly desperate, tried to protect her. He invited noblewomen to attend her. He had physicians testify to her condition. He even opened the palace to public scrutiny. But the more he tried to prove the truth, the more the rumors twisted against them. And Mary? She did not weep. She did not fight. She endured, because she knew her enemies would not be satisfied until they could see the child emerge with their own eyes, until her pain became their spectacle, until her agony became their evidence. She was not just expected to give birth, she was expected to perform it. And so, days before her labor began, the list was drawn. 40 witnesses, statesmen, soldiers, courtiers, midwives, enemies, all chosen, not for comfort, not for support, but to watch, to verify, to judge. Mary had been crowned as Queen of England, but now she was something else. A woman whose womb had been turned into a courtroom, whose labor would be her defense, whose screams would serve as testimony. And when the time came, she would not hide. She would let them watch, because it was the only way to silence them. The morning of June 10, 1688, began with the sound of bells, but they did not ring in celebration. They rang because the Queen's labor had begun, and all of London was holding its breath. Inside St. James's Palace, the air was thick with incense and nerves. The Queen's private chamber, once a place of silence and prayer, had been transformed. Curtains were drawn back. The warm quiet of womanhood, midwives, gentle hands, whispered encouragement, had been replaced with something far colder. Rows of chairs were lined along the walls. Documents were prepared. The windows were opened for air, but no breeze came. And then the witnesses arrived. One by one, 40 people stepped into the Queen's birthing room, not to comfort her, but to confirm her. There were noblemen in stiff coats, court ladies with tight expressions, bishops clutching their crosses, and enemies in disguise. Those who had spoken against her now seated to watch her suffer. They were here not as friends, but as judges. The Queen lay on her back, pale and wide-eyed, her hands clenched in the bedsheets. The midwives bustled around her, their practiced calm barely masking the pressure they felt. This was no ordinary delivery. This was the most political birth in English history. Mary's breath came in sharp gasps. Her face, damp with sweat, turned to the side as another contraction ripped through her. She did not scream, not yet, but her eyes brimmed with something more than pain. Shame. The room, meant to be sacred, had become a stage. She had no privacy, no comfort, only the knowledge that every sound she made, every drop of blood, every movement of her body would be remembered and recorded. To many in that room, she was not a woman in pain. She was a suspect being cross-examined by her enemies. Still, she labored, for hours. Midwives whispered reassurance. The king paced in another room, barred from entry. The Queen gripped the edge of the mattress so tightly her knuckles turned white. And through it all, no one left. They watched, they judged, they whispered to one another. And then finally, just after 10 in the morning, it happened. A cry. A sharp, newborn cry filled the chamber. The Queen sobbed, half from agony, half from relief. The midwife lifted the child high for all to see, bloodied, squirming, alive. A boy, the heir, the long-awaited Catholic son of James II. Real, breathing, undeniable. The witnesses leaned forward. Some nodded. Others remained stone-faced. But no one could deny what they had seen with their own eyes. There was no warming pan, no baby smuggled beneath cloaks, no trick. Only a queen, broken with exhaustion, and a child, real and crying, swaddled in linen. For a brief moment, there was silence, not of doubt, but of something colder, defeat. The queen had done what they said she could not, and yet instead of praise, she received only more whispers, because truth, it seemed, was never enough. As the child was handed to the wet nurse and recorded in the official log, Mary turned her head to the side. Her eyes were half closed, her lips parted in silent breath. Not victory, not joy, just survival. She had given them the truth, given them her body, given them her pain, and still, they would doubt her. But for now, she had done what no one thought she could. She had birthed a king and silenced her enemies with the sound of his first breath. The queen had done her part. She had given them the child, not in secrecy, not behind closed doors, but in full view of witnesses, nobles, skeptics, and spies. The birth was documented. The moment was recorded. And still, when the infant's first cry faded into the stillness of the palace walls, it was not relief that followed. It was disbelief. The child's name was James Francis Edward Stuart, and from the moment he entered the world, he was not just a baby. He was a question, a challenge, a threat. To the queen, he was a miracle. To the king, he was a long-awaited son. But to England's Protestant elite, he was the beginning of the end, because now the crown had a Catholic heir, and that changed everything. Within hours, the rumors began again, louder now, more dangerous. The witnesses had seen the birth, yes, but suddenly that wasn't enough. Some claimed the witnesses were bribed. Others said the real queen had never even been pregnant, that the entire birth was an illusion, staged with actors and lies, that a servant woman had birthed a child elsewhere, and Mary had simply played her part. The old tale of the warming pan, absurd as it was, returned with vengeance. Pamphlets flooded the streets. Woodcut prints depicted the queen lifting her skirts to hide a baby underneath. Coffeehouses echoed with laughter and slander. Preachers took to their pulpits, warning the faithful that a Catholic king had been smuggled into the royal line like poison in a goblet of wine. Even people who had once supported the monarchy began to turn. They didn't care that the queen had suffered. They didn't care that the child was real. They only cared about who he would become. A Catholic prince, a future Catholic king. And that, to them, was heresy with a crown. In the months that followed, the backlash grew into something far more dangerous than rumor. Parliament seethed with quiet rebellion. Protestant nobles reached across the Channel to the one man who could stop what they feared most. William of Orange, the Dutch prince, married to Mary's Protestant stepdaughter. By autumn, William had gathered his fleet. By winter, he invaded England. And in what would come to be called the Glorious Revolution, King James II was overthrown without a single pitched battle. The Queen, barely recovered from childbirth, fled with her son in the dead of night. Through snow and silence, under cover of secrecy, she held the child to her chest and boarded a boat that would carry them across the Channel. From that day forward, she would be known not as Queen of England, but as the mother of the Pretender. The boy she had bled to bring into the world was no longer a prince in the eyes of England. He was a threat, a fugitive, a name they would erase from history if they could. But Mary remembered. In a quiet palace in France, she raised him in exile. She taught him not just to pray, but to carry himself like a king. She told him stories of England, not of glory, but of betrayal. She whispered his name in the halls of Versailles until even the French court came to call him James III. And yet behind her strength was a sorrow she never spoke. She had given everything to that country, her dignity, her body, her child. She had endured pain no queen should have to endure. And still, they had cast her out. But she never regretted the birth, only that it wasn't enough, because in the end, the truth had been seen, witnessed, documented, but not believed. She was once called Your Majesty, but in her final years, no one bowed when she entered the room. There were no crowns, no velvet, no tapestries with her name sewn into gold thread. Only candlelight, a few trusted servants, and the echo of a son's voice calling her Maman. Mary of Modena died in exile, not on a throne, but in a small French chateau, her body worn by grief and quiet resilience. History would not remember her as a queen. They would call her something else, a mother of a failed king, a Catholic danger, a liar with a warming pan. But those words were written by the victors, by the men who never stepped foot in that birthing room, by those who never saw the way she trembled as the pain tore through her, or the way her son wailed the moment he entered a world that never wanted him. They weren't there, but we remember. We remember the woman who endured what no queen before or after her would ever be asked to endure. A public labor, a trial with her body as the only evidence, a humiliation designed not just to test her, but to break her. The crown sat heavy on her head, not because of its gold, but because of what it cost. She wasn't born into royalty. She was born into politics. Married off at 14 to a man twice her age, in a land where her religion made her dangerous, and her silence made her suspicious. She had no power, no party, no army of nobles behind her. What she had was a child, a living, breathing child. And that, in the eyes of England, was her greatest crime. Because the truth is, the Queen's suffering didn't matter, even after they saw her give birth, even after they heard the cries and saw the blood. It wasn't enough. Why? Because it was never about truth. It was about fear. Fear that a Catholic boy would one day wear the crown. Fear that a woman, foreign and faithful, could alter the future of an empire by simply doing what nature asked of her. So they destroyed her story. They rewrote it in jokes and satire. They laughed about the warming pan. They mocked the popish plot. They called her child the old pretender, as if his birth was some elaborate game of dress-up. But behind those false titles, behind the mockery, was a truth that refused to die. He was real. She was real. The pain was real. She had given England a prince, and England gave her exile. In France, she became a ghost of the monarchy she once served. But she never stopped praying, never stopped teaching her son to walk like a king, even if the world called him nothing but a shadow. He would grow up to fight for the throne, to cross the sea in search of the land that had rejected him at birth. He would never wear the crown, but he would always carry it in his blood. And through it all, Mary remained the same, silent, strong, unseen. No grand speeches, no memoirs, no revenge, just a mother, holding on to the last thing they hadn't taken from her. Her son's belief that he had once been born into a destiny, not a lie. Today, history remembers kings and battles. It remembers laws and revolutions, but it forgets what it cost to create them. It forgets the woman who gave birth on a stage, who turned her body into evidence, who silenced her enemies with pain, not power. And perhaps it is easier that way, to forget her, to laugh at her, to reduce her to a punchline, a warming pan queen, a foreign wife, a failed monarch. But if you look closely, if you listen beyond the pages of those polished history books, you can still hear her, not in speeches, not in proclamations, but in a single moment, a single cry, a single breath. That proved she had been telling the truth all along. And maybe that's what makes her story powerful. Not that she won, but that she never lied, not with her words, not with her body, not with the child she cradled while the world called her a fraud. She knew the truth. She bore it into the world. And for one fragile moment, before the world turned away again. They saw it.